Good day, everyone. I'm Bob Craven, Director of the FAA's Office of Airport Planning and Programming. On behalf of DOT and the FAA, I'm pleased to provide this briefing on our plans to implement the provisions of the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, through our newly created Airport Rescue Grants Program. Because we're all now familiar with last year's CARES Act Airport Grants Program and the recent CRISA Airport Coronavirus Response Grant Program, throughout this briefing, I will compare and contrast ARPA features with CARES and CRISA for ease of understanding their similarities and differences. Before we dive into ARPA, I want to briefly summarize the three relief programs. We started in March of last year with $10 billion under the CARES Act, followed 6 months ago with $2 billion under CRISA, and now $8 billion under ARPA. That's $20 billion invested in COVID relief for airports, on top of our normal annual $3.2 billion Airport Improvement Program, or AIP. These funds have helped airports stay open and operating safely in spite of the dramatic decrease in passenger travel and normal revenue streams. They work to maintain pre-pandemic employment levels at 90% or better at our small, medium, and large hub airports that service about 98% of the traveling public. They stabilized airport financial solvency by funding debt service. That was dramatically highlighted when Moody's bond ratings for airports bounced back from negative to neutral or positive outlooks when ARPA was passed. Finally, CRISA provided $200 million and ARPA provides $800 million to help sustain airport concessions, so they are ready for the return of passenger demands. Now let's review the ARPA Airport Grants Program. Over the next 13 slides, I will address ARPA provisions and eligibility, grant amount formulas, grant applications, execution and payments, and finally, audit requirements. First, ARPA's key provisions. ARPA was signed into law on March 11th. Similar in purpose as CARES and CRISA, ARPA appropriated nearly $8 billion to support eligible airports to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Similar to CRISA, funds are available for costs related to operations, personnel, cleaning, combating the spread of pathogens, and debt service payments, providing rent and minimum annual guarantee, or MAG, relief for concessions at primary airports, and, much like CARES, but not like CRISA, ARPA provides additional funds to make our AIP and supplemental discretionary grants this year at 100% federal share, as well as make the amendments on last year's AIP multi-year grants at 100% federal share. Like CARES and CRISA, it's important to emphasize that ARPA is not AIP, which funds grants with the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. AIP supports airport infrastructure projects to improve safety, security, capacity, and environmental sustainability, whereas ARPA funds, which come from the general fund, are available for operational expenses and debt service, which are not eligible expenses under AIP. We are awarding ARPA funds on an expedited basis and have set a target of November this year for sponsors to apply for these funds to ensure they are spent expeditiously for their intended uses to support ongoing safe operations at our airports. Also, like CARES and CRISA, there are workforce retention requirements. ARPA extends the 90% workforce retention requirement for large, medium, and small hub airports through this September. Finally, like CRISA, ARPA provides less opportunity for airport development than CARES did. However, there is limited eligibility for airport development if that development is directly related to preventing the spread of pathogens. I'll discuss that limitation in a moment. Just like CARES and CRISA, eligible airports in the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, or NIPIAS, including commercial service airports, reliever airports, and some public-owned general aviation airports, are eligible for ARPA. However, like CRISA, ARPA has some exceptions. First, as you might recall, the CARES Act formulas resulted in a small number of airports, 31 of nearly 3,300 airports, receiving more than 4 times their annual operating cost. Those airports are specifically excluded from additional ARPA relief. Secondly, unclassified airports will not receive any allocations under ARPA. This is more a function of the NIPIAS than of ARPA requirements. CARES was based on the previous NIPIAS, and CRISA and ARPA are based on the NIPIAS that was just published last September. The current NIPIAS identifies no development costs for unclassified airports because, under statutory changes in 2018, those airports are no longer eligible for AIP funding to support airport development. And because their ARPA formulas are based on identified airport development costs, the resulting allocation is zero. Even with those exceptions, over 3,000 of the 3,300 airports in the NIPIAS are eligible for ARPA. ARPA allocations are similar to CRRSA. There are three main buckets. First, $6.492 billion is available to primary airports. Second, $100 million is available to non-primary airports. The third category provides $800 million to primary airports for concession, rent, and MAG relief. As mentioned, this is all at 100% federal share, so $608 million is reserved for that. I will expand on each of these in the next few slides. As noted, primary airports receive not more than $6.492 billion, which is allocated using statutory AIP primary and cargo apportionment formulas, just like we calculated 2021 AIP entitlements, with two exceptions. Like CRRSA, ARPA eliminates the $26 million AIP limit for primary airports and the reduction for imposing passenger facility charges. Running the formulas totals roughly $1.7 billion, and the remaining funds are allocated based on an airport's number of enplanements in calendar year 2019 as a percentage of total calendar year 2019 enplanements, similar to CARES, except CARES used 2018 data. Again, non-primary airports receive not more than $100 million. Just like CARES and CRRSA, these funds are allocated by NIPIAS rule based on a relative portion of development cost by category. That settles out to be $148,000 for national airports, $59,000 for regional airports, $32,000 for local airports, $22,000 for basic airports, and as discussed earlier, zero for unclassified airports. We got as close to the $100 million limit as formula rounding would allow. Not more than $800 million is appropriated to primary airports for concession relief. Unlike CRRSA, it is split into two pots, $640 million for eligible in-terminal small airport concessions and $160 million for eligible in-terminal large airport concessions. Like CRRSA, these funds are allocated first from us to the airports and then from the airports to the concessions. Just like the $6.492 billion allocated to primary airports that I noted earlier, our concession allocations to the airports are based on the airport's number of enplanements in calendar year 2019 as a percentage of total calendar year 2019 enplanements. So it's a pro rata share based on enplanements. Sponsors then provide a pro rata share rent and MAG relief to each eligible concession in an amount that reflects the concession's proportional share of the airport's total amount of rent and MAG over a baseline time period. Acceptable examples are rent collections for calendar year 2019, first quarter of 2020, or even January or February of 2020. The most important thing is that this analysis reflects a normal pre-pandemic era. Sponsors provide relief from rent and MAG to eligible in-terminal airport concessions, as defined in Part 23 of CFR 49, for no less than the amount granted. Unlike CRRSA, there is no 2% set aside for sponsors to administer rent and MAG relief, so the entire $800 million flows through to benefit concessions. As it was in CRRSA, concession relief is probably the most confusing provision in ARPA, so I'll come back to concessions relief in a couple of slides. Unlike CARES, which allowed grant funds to be used like airport revenue, ARPA, like CRRSA, is specifically limited to operational expenses, debt service payments, and costs related to combating the spread of pathogens at the airport. Costs must be directly related to the airport, consistent with the FAA's revenue use policy and additional COVID-19 guidance. Eligibility for development purposes is limited to airport projects directly related to combating the spread of pathogens such as HVAC systems, terminal reconfiguration for social distancing, and facilities to accommodate health screening. Of course, all development projects follow AIP requirements, except for project eligibility. As promised, a little more about concession relief. The processes to build concession relief plans and obtain reimbursements are the same as CRRSA. In the allocation tables posted today, we provided total small and large concessions allocated amounts for eligible airports. Just like CRRSA, sponsors can apply for these funds in a separate grant application and agreement. If a sponsor is considering declining these funds, they should not submit an application, but rather consider their options and consult with their local Airports District Office or Regional Office. The sponsor develops a plan for how they will allocate the grant funds among their eligible small and large concessions and how they will provide rent relief. And the sponsor will consult with their concession stakeholders on that relief plan. After consultation, the sponsor submits their rent relief plan along with their payment request in the Delphi e-invoicing system, and we will review and process the payment. Finally, if circumstances change in the relief plan, the sponsor needs to update us after conducting additional consultation with concessions stakeholders. Although introduced in CRRSA, concessions relief is still relatively new to all of us, and ARPA is a bit different. So please refer to the frequently asked questions posted on our ARPA website for additional details. We are using the same application process for ARPA grants as we did for CARES and CRRSA. Today, we are announcing the amounts allocated to each airport sponsor on our website. Sponsors can file a simplified application form 424 for the general grant and concessions relief grant as appropriate. We'll start issuing grant agreements immediately after receiving your applications, so that should happen by the end of June or early July. Grant agreements and state block grant program agreements will be very similar to CARES and CRRSA agreements. Finally, the 100% federal share on AIP and supplemental discretionary grants is automatic, so no additional sponsor action is required. Requirements for ARPA grants are similar to CARES and CRRSA and must be in accordance with 2 CFR Part 200, Buy American and Prevailing Wage requirements, exclusive rights prohibitions, Title VI civil rights, and additional requirements related to concessions relief. For the limited airport development projects, the requirements are similar to AIP grants. Requesting and processing payments is the same as CARES and CRRSA using the Delphi e-invoicing system. Sponsors must submit detailed invoice summaries and retain supporting documentation. All reimbursements are subject to 2 CFR Part 200 requirements. Just as it was for CARES and CRRSA, sponsor and FAA accountability is paramount. There is heightened sensitivity to lawful expenditure of these relief funds. Therefore, sponsors must retain complete records to support all grant payments, including documentation related to concession relief. Consistent with our usual practice, we will audit ARPA grants to prevent improper payments. Thank you for your participation, partnership, and commitment to ensure our nation's airports remain open and safe. For more information, please visit our ARPA website at www.faa.gov/airports/airport_rescue_grants. We encourage you to subscribe to this page for automatic update notifications. You may also email general ARPA questions to the same email you have been using for CARES and CRRSA at caresairports@faa.gov. Thank you again for all you do to connect our communities and economies, and please stay safe.